You always gotta light a candle if you're gonna tell a spooky story. Familial betrayals, body snatching, and dismemberment. Who could ask for more? Welcome to the first recorded murder in Medfield, Massachusetts. I want to specify the first recorded murder in Medfield, since the genocide of the Native Americans at the beginning of this town's history was not treated as a crime. With that in mind, let's begin. Medfield is a farming town with just about 745 residents. At the time, the tradition was for a father to pass down his farm to his eldest son, and for the rest of the family to then work on the farm. The Masons began the town's largest farm just a year prior to the murders in 1801. The Masons had a large family of 13 children, including their eldest son Ebenezer, and their second eldest child, a daughter named Kezia. Kezia was married to a man named William Pitt Allen, who was regarded as strong and bright in the community. One day, the father of the house, Asa Mason, decided it was time for him to pass on his farm, since he was getting too old to properly tend to the fields. Almost everyone believed that he would pass on his farm to Ebenezer, the eldest son, the next in line. But Ebenezer reportedly struggled from mental afflictions. It's hard to say what those would be diagnosed as now, but he certainly did struggle with something mentally. Due to these mental afflictions, Asa did not want to hand down his farm to Ebenezer. So, who did Asa decide to run the farm instead? In a shocking twist, he chooses his son-in-law, William Pitt Allen. Because Kezia, William's wife, was Asa's oldest daughter and second eldest child, and because William was beloved in the community, William felt like the perfect choice to continue on the family's legacy. This was unusual, since the tradition at the time was to hand down the farm to the next eldest biological son. Now imagine you're Ebenezer for a moment. For your entire life, you have worked so hard on your family's farm. Based on the culture of the times, you've been expecting that one day you will be given the glory of being named head of the family. And then, when your time has finally arrived, all of that glory is ripped away as you're skipped over for your brother-in-law. The anger and disappointment he must have felt in that moment, I'm sure, were overwhelming. But instead of throwing a fit, Ebenezer accepted his father's decision and went back to work. He worked and he worked and he worked until he just couldn't work anymore. On May 18, 1802, both Ebenezer and William were working in the same field with shovels. With his shovel in the ground, William had his back turned to his brother-in-law, and he was simply doing his duties. Distracted by the warm dirt and crops, William didn't notice Ebenezer sneaking up behind him. Slowly and quietly, Ebenezer crept behind the leader of his family's farm, the man who stole his title. He raised his shovel above his head, and without a second thought, thwack! He hit William in the head with his shovel and proceeded to hit him at least 5 more times, killing him there in the field that should have been under his name. Ebenezer then fled, leaving William's body lying lifeless on the ground. After neither man returned home for dinner, the entire family went out searching for them both. When they found the horrific scene of William's dead body, they knew Ebenezer was the killer, since they were the only two scheduled to work that field that day. But Ebenezer was nowhere to be found. Word quickly spread in this small town of the horrific crime, and Ebenezer was caught mere hours later. After Ebenezer was caught, he was tried at the Dedham Supreme Court, where he was tried for murder. The jury came to a unanimous decision, and in August 1802, he was convicted and sentenced to be hanged. The judge condemned Ebenezer for bringing tragedy to their peaceful little county. On October 7th, 1802, the first convicted murderer of Medfield was hanged for his crimes. He was then buried in the Vine Lake Cemetery in his hometown. Now you may think that this is the end of the story, but that is far from the case. On Halloween of all days, two men dug up Ebenezer Mason's grave and stole his body. Why would anyone want to steal a body? Well, picture this. Scientists are making discovery after discovery, including how the human body works. All the best universities in the country are offering a course called Anatomical Dissection, which, you guessed it, involves dissecting cadavers. Schools were willing to pay big bucks for these bodies. One could go for $100 or more in the early 1800s, which is about $2,900 in today's currency. Body snatching was such a huge issue that they invented burglary-proof grave vaults made of steel, which became incredibly popular. This monetary motivation was enough for Zachary Howe from Franklin and Jonathan Sprague from Dedham to commit the crime and steal a body they assumed wouldn't be missed. Unfortunately for Jonathan and Zadok, a witness who watched the two men dig up the body ratted them out both quickly to the police, and they were shortly apprehended. This story was the hottest news in Medfield and in neighboring towns. Everyone piled into the Dedham Supreme Court again for this trial, but the night before the trial began, the key eyewitness mysteriously disappeared into the night, never to be seen again. Was he murdered? Did he leave on his own accord? It's impossible to say. His name was Royal Sales, and no record was ever kept of him outside of his involvement in this trial. We do know that he went to the police as soon as he saw the grave robbery and agreed to testify until the night before the trial when he disappeared. Unfortunately, in court, the prosecution had no other evidence besides the word of a man who seemingly vanished into thin air, so the two alleged body snatchers were released without any charges. But now the town's selectmen had another problem on their hands. They were stuck with the decomposing body of Ebenezer Mason. The selectmen included John Baxter, Charles Haymont, Moses Hartshorn, Jason Mason, and William Clark. The five men couldn't just put Ebenezer back in Vine Lake Cemetery in fear of his grave being robbed again. So they came up with the most logical conclusion. Cut up his body and put him in pieces in varying locations in the town. First, his head was buried off of South Street next to Stock River because it was a solitary place and believed nobody would bother to go dig it up. When I visited there myself, believe me, it was incredibly solitary. I couldn't even get close. Second, and most importantly, they buried his torso at the intersection of South Street and Noon Hill Road, which is an incredibly busy street. They did this because in the early 1800s, the belief was that your torso held your soul. And putting him in this popular intersection was a representation that his soul was at the crossroads between heaven and hell. Unfortunately, his arms and legs were not deemed important enough to have a record kept of where they were buried, but we do know that they are here in Medfield and not with his head or his torso. To this day, Ebenezer's body parts remained scattered around town. They never dug any of them up. Now, there are some conflicting reports as to why the selectmen decided to cut up Ebenezer's body. Some reports claim that Ebenezer was deemed unworthy to be buried in a formal cemetery by many people in town due to his violent crimes. So to appease the angry townsfolk, the people in charge found an alternate way to bury his body. Other reports claim that it was simply to avoid the issue of his body being dug up once more, since the family did not want to pay for one of those burglary-proof vaults. Which is true? Well, it's truly impossible to say, but I like to believe it's the former. Thank you for joining me in this tale of jealousy, anger, and greed. History is so fascinating, and I always love to look back at our culture. This story is an incredibly fascinating tale to both tell and learn. And it's just a small peek into the weird world of small town American history. Thank you again. This has been a pleasure. Hopefully I'll see you next time.